Hello, welcome to chapter 14. In this chapter, we will cover fundamental concepts and ideas related to government intervention in market activity. In particular, this chapter examines 4 reasons why free markets may fail to provide a socially efficient amount of goods and services, as well as an overview of government policies designed to alleviate such market failures. So let's start with market failure number 1, which is market power. When a company in a market produces an amount that is less than the socially efficient level because it's charging a price that exceeds marginal cost, we say that a company has market power, like a monopoly or monopolistic competition, and in some cases oligopolies. And this is considered a market failure because the value to society of producing another unit is greater than the cost to produce another unit. Why? Well, remember, the socially efficient amount in a market occurs when the price equals marginal cost. This quantity maximizes the sum of consumer and producer surplus. Equally important, the socially efficient price and quantity arise naturally in a perfectly competitive market when companies have no market power. In the monopoly chapter, we talk about the deadweight laws, which essentially are the cost to society created by market inefficiency. That is the loss in consumer and producer surplus that arise when a company with market power charges a price higher than perfect competition and produces an amount lower than perfect competition. Here I reproduce a chart to refresh your memory. We also talked about antitrust policy, which purpose is to eliminate the deadweight laws of monopoly by making it illegal for managers to engage in activities that foster monopoly power. Your textbook provides a good explanation and discussion about a series of acts that US Congress has passed over at least the last 100 years. Make sure you read this section in your textbook, paying particular attention to the main purpose of each act, horizontal merger guidelines, and the role of price regulation on monopolies. Okay, let's move on to market failure number 2, externalities. This market failure takes place when market activity produces an impact on bystanders without being compensated. Although externalities can be positive, most cases include negative externalities, that is, when the impact is negative. A typical example is pollution, which produces a variety of respiratory illnesses among the affected population, but the companies and agents polluting the air don't pay for medical costs of medicines. This type of problem is generally caused by the absence of well-defined property rights. In this case, who has the rights over the air, companies or people? The failure is often resolved when a government defines itself to be the owner of the environment and uses its power to induce the socially efficient levels of output and pollution. In this chart, you can see the market equilibrium for aluminum, which is, by the way, a very pollutant industry. The free market equilibrium is reached at point A, where suppliers only consider the private or internal cost of producing aluminum. However, if these suppliers were taking into account not only the private but also the social cost, they would reduce production and a new equilibrium would be reached at point B, which is called the socially efficient equilibrium. In other words, point B is the desirable outcome from the point of view of society. But what we see happening in these free markets is point A. In other words, the market produces too much of a bad thing. To solve the externality problem caused by pollution, the US Congress passed the Clean Air Act in 1970. Basically, the act causes companies to internalize the cost of emitting pollutants either by taxing them or by selling pollution permits that, by the way, are costly to acquire. The idea is to move the market equilibrium from point A to point A. Point B to point A. In other words, the government intervenes this otherwise free market, implementing a policy that internalizes the externality in order to achieve the socially efficient equilibrium that the free market can't achieve on its own. All right, public goods are market failure number 3. Public goods and services are, number 1, non-rival, which means that the consumption of the good by one person does not preclude other people from also consuming the good. And number 2, non-rival, which means that consumption, once provided, no one can be excluded from consuming the good. Examples of these public goods include a public park, the military, public education, and an assorted list of goods and services provided by local, state, and federal governments. But why are public goods considered a market failure? Consider this. How much are you willing to pay for, say, public lighting, or for the public drain system in your city, or for another bench at the public park? Exactly. There are no markets for these things. Worse, when a group of people rely on the efforts or payments of others to provide this good or service, we say that there is a free rider problem. Therefore, when we face either missing private markets and or free rider problems, we need government intervention to make sure that such goods and services are produced and distributed in a socially efficient way. And finally, market failure number 4, incomplete information. Efficiently functioning markets require participants to have reasonably good information about prices, about quality, available technologies, and the risk associated with working particular jobs or consuming particular products. But of course, this is not always the case. This doesn't always happen. Market inefficiencies result when participants have incomplete information. One important source of market failure is called asymmetric information, where some market participants have better information than others. An example of this is when you go to a car dealership. The seller, of course, has better information about the status of a used car than you as the buyer. This is why governments must implement a series of policies to deal with asymmetric information, which include, for example, rules against insider trading, certification rules, regulations for truth in lending and truth in advertising, and also providing the legal structure for the enforcing of contracts. Please check your textbook for an expanded explanation. Now, although government policies can improve the allocation of resources to alleviate market failures, sometimes benefit some parties at the expense of others. Therefore, lobbyists spend significant amounts of money and time in trying to influence government policy. This process is known as rent seeking, and of course is tied to the lobbying industry. All right, let's move on to the next and short section dealing with government intervention in international markets. Let's start with quotas. A quota is a government restriction that limits the amount of imported goods that can legally enter the country. The idea, of course, is to protect domestic producers from international competition. However, this also implies higher domestic prices, which domestic consumers don't appreciate. In fact, domestic producers benefit at the expense of domestic consumers and foreign producers. Another similar policy is a tariff, which can be either a lump sum tariff, when a fixed fee must be paid by foreign companies to the domestic government to be able to sell in the domestic market, or can be excise tariff, when the importing company must pay a fee to the domestic government on each unit it brings into the country. Both the lump sum tariff or the excise tariff are also designed to protect domestic producers from international competition. And similar to quotas, tariffs produce higher domestic prices that domestic consumers don't appreciate. These, of course, are topics of international trade that, are not covered in managerial economics, but I thought important at least to mention them. Okay, this concludes chapter 14 lecture. I will see you until the next chapter. If you have questions or comments, please let me know.